Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. It's good to see you all on Gravitas. If you've been watching WION or following us on social media, you would know that our team was in Dubai for the 4th edition of the WION Global Summit. It was a hybrid event thanks to the pandemic. Many guests could not travel to the venue, so they joined virtually. But the pandemic could not take away from the richness of the event and the wisdom that they shared with us, our dialogue partners. On Gravitas tonight, as we discuss the developments of the day, the top headlines from across the world, we shall try to look at them from the lens of what our dialogue partners told us, from their perspective and their understanding of which way the world is going. 1. How is our world changing? Fashion brands are caught in the latest war between China and the West. 2. Which forces are at play now? From the aggression of China to the coming closer of India and Bangladesh, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to be travelling to Dhaka tomorrow. 3. What are the challenges that lie ahead? The pandemic is not over. Brazil is gasping for breath. 4. How deeply the world is interconnected. One ship turns in the Suez Canal and we have an international traffic jam. 5. What the future holds for all of us. Wine from space, among other things. There's a lot to discuss. Let's start with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Britain has imposed sanctions on the business interests of the Myanmar military over the February 1st coup. The US, meanwhile, is planning to impose sanctions on two conglomerates controlled by Myanmar's military over the deadly crackdown on anti-coup protesters. The US Treasury will blacklist Myanmar Economic Corporation and Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited. A group of demonstrators in Yangon held a flower protest marking their defiance against the junta's violent crackdown on anti-coup demonstrators. Myanmar security forces fired at pro-democracy activists taking part in street demonstrations on Thursday, killing at least 4 people. Weeks after Beijing's ratification of the extradition treaty with Turkey, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met his Turkish counterpart in Ankara, even as members of the 40,000-strong Uyghur community in Turkey staged protests against the visit to highlight the plight of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The European Union has tightened its vaccine export control mechanism to prevent what it sees as an unfair one-way flow of vaccines out of the bloc. Reports say the measure could limit vaccine exports to countries like Britain, which produce some of their own vaccines, but do not in turn send doses to the EU. India has recorded its highest single-day COVID-19 tally in over 5 months. Over 53,000 people have tested positive and 251 deaths reported in the last 24 hours. Maharashtra, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu are the 5 worst-hit states. North Korea launched 2 ballistic missiles into the sea near Japan. The Japanese Prime Minister accused the nation of fueling tensions ahead of the Tokyo Olympics and ramping up pressure on the Biden administration as it finalizes its North Korea policy. Protesters and activists clashed with police in Los Angeles during protests against a plan to clear a large homeless camp at the city's iconic Echo Park Lake, which has grown to more than 100 tents. Authorities say over $500,000 will be needed to repair the damages after clearing the site. The Olympic torch relay sets off from Fukushima, beginning a 4-month countdown to the Summer Games in Tokyo. About 10,000 runners will carry the torch across Japan's 47 prefectures, starting from the site of the 2011 quake and tsunami that killed around 20,000 people. World champions France were held to a 1-1 draw by Ukraine in their opening 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifier. Antoine Griezmann opened the scoring in Paris with a superb effort, but the hosts were then wasteful in front of goal and were made to pay as Ukraine drew level in the second half through a deflected strike. Elsewhere, world number 1 Belgium showed their class with a come-from-behind 3-1 win over Wales. Women's soccer star Megan Rapinoe was hosted by US President Joe Biden at the White House to mark Equal Pay Day and help set new goals for equality. 2019 FIFA Women's Player of the Year Rapinoe has been spearheading the fight for equal pay for the US women's soccer team, who are paid less than their male counterparts despite consistent success at the global stage.
And I've been told that I don't deserve any more than less, because I am a woman.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden called for equal pay in all spheres of life, and both are pushing for Congress to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act.
On Wednesday, we held the 4th edition of the WION Global Summit. The aim was to hold a constructive dialogue on the changing world order. After months of brainstorming, weeks of preparation and the nail-biting wait for last-minute permissions, our team travelled to Dubai. And the theme for this year was power play in a post-pandemic world. The idea was to begin a conversation that involves all the stakeholders, even the ones that we do not agree with, to find an inclusive blueprint for a safer and better future. And tonight I'm happy to tell you that we are back from Dubai with a lot of insights, with a lot of perspective. And I will take a few minutes tonight to share some of them with you, some of those thoughts. The chief guest for our summit was India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. He addressed a host of issues. He pointed out how power plays have always existed, but it was the playing field that is now changing. He also talked about the rise of new global powers, the importance of multipolarity, the game-changing nature of technology. But the most striking takeaway for us from his address was this.
It has raised fundamental concerns about the virtues of globalization by bringing out the importance of reliable supply chains. It has also brought out in the open the behavior of states at times of stress, thereby highlighting the more uncomfortable realities of global politics. It saw challenges to governance in different societies and made us realize the quality of leadership and the strength of motivation. It has made health security and perhaps food security far more integral to national security of countries.
Health and food security is integral to national security. There's a reason why Dr. S. Jaishankar is called a policy wonk among politicians, because if there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, it is that missiles cannot defeat microbes. The world is fighting a tiny virus, as our weapons and defenses lie useless. And the underlying message in the foreign minister's statement was that we need to prepare for pandemics just as we do for wars. System is critical to a robust national security. State Minister of Defense participated in our summit all the way from Tokyo, and it was unlike any other address that we've seen before. It reflected the kind of importance Japan gives to dedication and preparedness. Mr. Yasuhide Nakayama used technology to make his point. Real-time maps and charts. He's a sitting MP, and in simple words, he explained to us the growing threat that China poses to the stability of the Indo-Pacific. You have to watch this.
This is China, this is Japan. If the China, especially the naval power, if they want to go out to the Pacific Ocean, this is kind of like a protection line to the Pacific Ocean. So to destroy or invade this wall is a key for the naval activity. So how to hedge the risk of the war, World War III, is the theme for the next generation.
Which brings us to China. Like I said, we wanted all stakeholders to have their say, so we extended an invite to Miss Regina I.P. Lau Suu-Kyi. She's a member of Hong Kong's Legislative and Executive Council, and this city has been in the news throughout the year last year. And on the same panel, we had Michael Tsai, former Defense Minister of Taiwan, and we were prepared for them to have a difference of opinion. But not for the way the difference manifested themselves. It was dramatic and unfortunate, we have to say. Our Chinese guest walked off when our Taiwanese guest rightly called COVID-19 the Wuhan virus, and when he referred to Taiwan as a sovereign nation. Watch this.
Greeting from Taiwan, love from Taiwan as well. In response to your questions about the multilateral institution fail in this COVID-19, or you may call the Wuhan virus.
I beg your pardon. I don't think you should stigmatize this virus by calling it Wuhan.
All right.
I will depart. I will leave this platform if you use this term again.
Fortunately, Taiwan as a nation, it is the most lucky.
I am sorry I have to leave this forum. Taiwan is not a nation. It is a renegade province of the People's Republic of China.
The whole point of this conversation is to have everyone put their points across, and I do request Miss Lau Suu-Kyi to be with us. The intolerance and brazenness was shocking, but it wasn't surprising. We were there to discuss power play in a post-pandemic world. And we got yet another reminder yesterday of how China plays by its own rules. We also discussed the ongoing seismic change in Gulf politics. 4 countries have formalized ties with Israel in the last 5 months. So we had a panel discussion on the opportunities and challenges this could create. And on this panel was Jason D. Greenblatt, the former White House envoy for Middle East, the man who was instrumental in realizing these peace deals. And he shared with us the inside stories. What went into the making of the Abraham Accords? The peace between Israel and Arab nations, and his remarks highlighted how creating policy is painstaking hard work and how critics, often in the press too, sit in judgment and dismiss deals with a very narrow, one-sided perspective.
We realized that people were sort of stuck in talking points, very short, aspirational thoughts that if we didn't develop further would never reach anything. It doesn't mean it wasn't the right approach before us, but we decided to move away from phrases like the two-state solution, which means different things to different people, phrases like a just solution for that or some solution for this, and re-educate people about the conflict. And I think with the strong leadership, President Trump, His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Bibi Netanyahu, the King of Bahrain and Morocco, and we realized that after all of these discussions, people were tired of the conflict, wanted to move on, wanted to express and support their own people's future, and the results speak for themselves. When we started, we were very clear with the leadership in the region. Do you want us to just speak around the issues, or do you want to speak directly to the issues? And while some in this audience, I'm not sure, may not appreciate Donald Trump's tweets or his manner of speaking, they understood that speaking directly is the key to solving issues.
Next, we had a discussion on the price of the pandemic, $16 trillion and counting. On the panel were guests from Poland, the UK, Australia and Russia. One of them spoke about the role India played during the pandemic. Alexander Dinkin, economic advisor to the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, said that India is one of the few powers which is independent from all capitals around the world.
India is one of very few powers which is still, let's say, independent from all capitals around the globe. When we look at Europe, you remember that during the 45th president, during Mr. Trump, idea of strategic autonomy spreading across the European capitals. Not anymore. Everybody happy with the leadership of the Washington. So I guess that India is the very important player in the post-COVID global order.
There are many more insights to share, many more ideas to dwell on and decode. For us, the biggest takeaway was this. In the middle of a pandemic that threatens to surge again with new mutations and rising cases, we managed to have thought leaders from more than 15 countries on one platform. This conversation, we say, was critical. The pandemic is changing our world, and we can give direction to that change instead of being swept by it. If we define the challenges and discuss potential solutions, we become active participants in shaping the post-pandemic world.
I'm truly glad to address the 4th edition of the WION World Summit, whose theme is Power Play in a post-pandemic world.
It's a great privilege and pleasure to join you all again at the WION Global Summit.
Let me thank the organizers of WION, this conference, for inviting me to this panel. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's my second time.
Meanwhile, China continues to wage a war. This time, the target is not a foreign government or a minority community at home. This time, China's target is foreign business. Some brands in particular are on target. The ones that showed some conscience and stopped buying supplies from Xinjiang slave camps. China is now going after them, and Chinese citizens appear to be willing accomplices. Let me show you some images. These are Chinese citizens. And what are they doing? They're burning Nike shoes. Not just ordinary citizens. Chinese celebrities have also joined them. 2 Chinese TV stars have cut their ties with Nike. They've refused to endorse the sports brand. This video is doing the rounds on social media. What you see is a Nike store in China's Shaanxi province. Citizens are protesting. What are they angry about? Nike refusing to source from Xinjiang, citing forced labor. China is prickly about this. Nike can't just do it. It is learning the hard way. And Nike is not the only brand at the receiving end. This manufactured outrage is being directed at clothing giant H&M too. What did they do? Nothing recently, but they made a statement some time ago. That old statement has now been pulled out to target the company. It was released in September last year, and we can now confirm that it no longer is available on H&M's website. So what does the statement say? H&M was quote-unquote deeply concerned about the forced labor practices in Xinjiang, and the company announced it is no longer buying cotton from Xinjiang. 8 months later, the backlash has begun. Reports say the Communist Youth League, an influential Communist Party organization, just happened to find this old post. And life changed for H&M in China. It's like a blizzard of hate that they're facing. H&M stores have been purged from maps and internet listings in China. Tmall, an e-commerce website from the Alibaba Group, no longer offers products from this brand. Other online stores like JD.com and Taobao have also banned the brand. The H&M app on the Chinese Android store has disappeared. The anger has now reached the streets of China.
They make money in China. Of course, part of the money should return to China. If they don't purchase cotton from Xinjiang, it's like excluding China. Then China, of course, can exclude them. This is very normal. Tit for tat.
Now they have come here to slander China, so I don't think I will shop at H&M.
We found a video. This is believed to be from a shopping mall in Sichuan. A worker was seen removing the H&M logo from a giant directory. That's the extent of hatred being directed at it. Chinese state media seems to be leading this boycott call. The Global Times has published a piece that calls the old H&M statement, quote-unquote, suicidal. The People's Daily, that's the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, started a hashtag, I support XJ Cotton, Xinjiang. Reports say this hashtag has generated 1.5 million posts, and it has been viewed 700 million times. Huang Xuan, a Chinese actor, has terminated his H&M endorsement contract. He claims, and I'm quoting again, human rights a human rights smear campaign is underway against China. And this is according to the Global Times. They published a report. So we have two big brands now facing boycott calls, both online and on the ground. Chinese celebrities are dumping them. The state media is calling for their boycott. The people are protesting. What does all of this tell you? That this is not an organic campaign. This, as I said, is manufactured outrage. It flows from the Chinese state. The government has launched a war on foreign brands that talk about ethics and rights. It wants to bully businesses into silence on Xinjiang. The Chinese Foreign Ministry made a statement on the boycott calls, and that too with visual ads. You have to look at this one.
这是当时在美国
This is a picture from the US when black slaves were forced to pick cotton in the fields. This is the picture that I have asked my colleague to print out of Xinjiang's cotton fields, which I have seen online. More than 40% are being harvested by machine. The accusation of so-called forced labor in Xinjiang does not exist. Some companies have believed such rumors. It is their own judgment on what actions they choose to take. But I believe Chinese people have their own freedom to express their opinions and feelings.
谣言，那么他自己怎么做是他自己的判。
Such freedom of expression. The idea is to make an example out of these brands. Other companies are already feeling the heat. Today there was a report about some cutting remarks from brands like Burberry, Adidas and New Balance. Apparently, this was about statements made 2 years ago. They might all face the wrath of the dragon in the days and weeks ahead. And at the center of all of this is cotton from Xinjiang. It is the source of 87% of China's cotton. And reports say that forced Uyghur labor is used to produce this cotton. This is the reason why the United States slapped sanctions on China. Last year, the US sanctioned China's largest cotton supplier. In January, the Trump administration imposed a blanket ban on import of cotton from Xinjiang. On Monday, that is the 22nd of March, the United States, the European Union, Britain and Canada announced sanctions too. They're aimed at some Chinese officials over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. And this is bad news for the Chinese government. It also hurts Chinese businesses. After all, China is the world's factory. If it loses a bulk of its buyers, what will it do with those forced labor camps? In fact, China is already feeling the pinch of these sanctions. According to a report published last month, Chinese exporters were complaining about a drop in orders from the West. Foreign brands that turned a blind eye to abuses and happily sourced from sweatshops in third world countries have been forced to course correct. Western government sanctions forced them to stop buying cotton from Xinjiang, and now the Chinese government's hate campaign is hurting them. The brands are caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's only fair to say that they walked themselves here. As for China, it is known to push back hard every time it is questioned. So this hate campaign comes as no surprise. And that said, there are still some brands that are yet to wake up to China's human rights abuses. Last we checked, there were a total of 83 of them, if not more. They're all directly or indirectly benefiting from abusive labor programs involving Uyghur Muslims in China. So which are these brands? What's their stance on the issue? How many Uyghur Muslims are suffering in China's slave camps? And what does it tell us about the economy of oppression? Here's a report.
Uyghurs for sale. This report has been released by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. It blows the lid off China's mass transfer of ethnic minorities for forced labor. It reveals how Uyghur Muslims are working in factories that are crucial to the supply chains of several well-known global brands. According to the report, more than 80,000 Uyghurs were transferred out of Xinjiang between 2017 and 2019. They were sent to factories far from home, forced to live in segregated dormitories, undergo lessons in Mandarin and ideological training. These factory workers have limited freedoms. They are subjected to constant surveillance, are forbidden from celebrating their festivals, and if they refuse to comply, they are sent to detention camps. The report reveals that 27 factories in 9 Chinese provinces are part of this abusive labor program. Which brands are employing their services? The report identifies 83 of them that benefit directly or indirectly. They are Abercrombie & Fitch, Acer, Adidas, Puma, Lacoste, Tommy Hilfiger, Skechers, Panasonic, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, to name a few. This data is based on supplier lists, media reports, and details of claimed suppliers by respective factories. When these brands were reached out for clarification, none of them were able to rule out their elements of forced Uyghur labor in their supply chains. In July 2020, Adidas and Lacoste pledged to cut down on forced labor supply chains. On the other hand, in November 2020, Apple was lobbying against a bill to stop companies benefiting from forced labor. Now, Nike has refused to source from Xinjiang, and the Chinese regime is accusing all foreign brands of tainting its name and image. The Chinese state media has signaled out H&M for its previous statements on Xinjiang. The Chinese social media is directing its fury at others. Some are bluntly telling brands like Adidas to leave China. Others say they will start opting for local brands instead. The result is this. On Thursday, the shares of China's Anta Sports jumped over 6%, while the shares of Li Ning surged over 7%. The message is simple. If you boycott Xinjiang, we will boycott you. But the implications will be severe for all sides involved. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Sanctions. It's how countries wage an economic war. But how did this idea come about? And how effective are they? It's a story that dates back to ancient Greece. A different time, a different politics, but the same result. A statesman from Athens, Pericles, was the first to impose sanctions. All city-states that refused to ally with Athens were placed under a trade embargo. Did it help? Not really. The Spartans went on to beat the Athenian alliance. So the first economic sanction in human history ended in failure. And this set the trend for what was to come. Here's the first thing that you need to know about sanctions. They can only be imposed from a position of power, which is why it is America's favorite tool. The US has imposed sanctions on more than a dozen countries. The major ones are Iran, Venezuela, China, and North Korea. Sanctions take different forms: arms embargoes, asset freezes, denial of visas, cutting off trade and credit lines. The idea is to cripple a country financially. US sanctions on China are not new. They're as old as the People's Republic itself. From 1949 to 1972, China was under American sanctions. It was typical Cold War era politics. They were lifted in 1972 ahead of the open door policy. But Chinese politics did not change. Democracy and human rights continued to be curbed. It reached a tipping point in 1989 during the Tiananmen Square massacre. American sanctions returned. But unlike the last century, economic warfare is not unilateral anymore. China now has the power to respond, at least on paper. A case in point is Hong Kong. In August last year, the US sanctioned Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong. Beijing responded with targeted action on 11 Americans, and this list included Republican Senators Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and Ted Cruz. But here's the problem. Both actions were toothless. Carrie Lam does not have assets in America, and these US senators do not have interests in China, so the sanctions were symbolic with no economic impact. And herein lies the problem with sanctioning leaders. Make no mistake, autocrats double up as businessmen. They have major economic interests, but they rarely extend their business interests overseas for these sanctions to make a dent. Think back to the Gulf War. The Bush White House sanctioned Saddam Hussein for 6 months. No effect. In the end, it took a major military offensive. A present-day example is Iran. Donald Trump followed the policy of maximum pressure, crippling sanctions that throttled the Iranian economy. What happened? Tehran continues to expand its nuclear arsenal. Last week, they revealed an entire city of missiles. So what is the lesson here? Sanctions have unintended effects. They help galvanize public opinion. For example, American sanctions are rallying calls in Iran and North Korea. They bring the people together against a common enemy, in this case, the United States. Sanctions only work in a collective. It cannot be a unilateral campaign, which is why the latest campaign against China is important. The US and its European partners have sanctioned China. The walls are closing in from all sides. So what are China's options here? Beijing will most likely deepen ties with existing allies, North Korea, Russia, Pakistan and Turkey, to name a few. The fact is, sanctions are a pinch, not a purge. There is a limit to what government action can achieve. But what about private businesses? It's a globalized world. Companies have interests all over the world, and this could be a game changer in economic warfare. 217 Chinese companies, 217, are listed in American exchanges. For dozens more, the American market is a money churner. Now think of the inverse. American companies look to China for raw materials, they operate factories there, and ignore abuses endured by the workers. So here is the question. Can Apple be docked for making iPhones in China? Can Tesla be pulled up for making cars in China? The answer is yes, Joe Biden could do it. But the companies will be livid. Years of capitalism has taught American firms to put profits over national interest. Donald Trump proposed taxes on American firms shifting away from the country, and he was criticized for trying to stage manage the economy. But for Chinese firms, it is different. Most of them are owned, at least in part, by the government, so national interest is paramount, even at the cost of losses. The future of economic warfare will be decided by private companies. They can take away jobs, funding and factories from rival nations. But will they indulge home governments? And if they don't, can governments force their hand? In the pursuit of tackling autocracy, will this not count as state hegemony? Think about it. For the moment, we move to Bangladesh. Tomorrow is a historic day for that country. It is the 50th anniversary of the country's liberation from Pakistan. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is travelling all the way to Dhaka to join the celebrations. And we've often told you the story of the liberation of Bangladesh, how in December of 1971, Indian troops began a war against Pakistan, and in 9 days, Indian soldiers ended Islamabad's campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing, bringing a new dawn for what was then known as East Pakistan. 50 years later, Bangladesh is entering a new phase. It is undergoing major economic and social changes, and as Bangladesh begins this new phase, Dhaka is once again turning to New Delhi to complete its transformation. It wants to establish itself as a regional power. In the next 2 days, India is expected to sign a number of pacts with Bangladesh, and reports say the agreements will boost cooperation in trade, connectivity, border development. And WION, I can tell you, is the only channel that has two correspondents. Our Dhaka correspondent will be bringing us a perspective from the government of Bangladesh, and we have sent our chief diplomatic correspondent as well all the way to Dhaka to see what the Indian side is doing. Our next report tells you what to expect.
The streets of Dhaka are decked up with the pictures of Bangabandhu. Celebratory as the country celebrates its 50th year of independence and the birth centenary of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the father of the nation. 2021 is also the 50th year that India and Bangladesh established diplomatic ties. For this, Indian Prime Minister will be in the national capital as its chief guest at the National Day program of Bangladesh on Friday, 26th March, standing alongside Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina.
The liberation war of Bangladesh began the call of Bangladesh's father of the nation, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, on 26th of March 1971. The war lasted for 9 months and 3 million people died. India extended all-out support for the cause of liberation of Bangladesh. Many Indian soldiers also sacrificed their lives. This shared historical legacy forms the bedrock of the relationship between New Delhi and Dhaka.
The Prime Minister's visit, his first foreign trip amid the pandemic, will be a packed one. Prime Minister Modi last travelled abroad in November of 2019. On Friday, when he lands, he will be welcomed by his counterpart, Sheikh Hasina herself, at the Hazrat Shah Jalal International Airport. It will be followed by a visit to the National Martyrs Memorial in Savar, where Indian Prime Minister will pay tribute to those who made sacrifices for the liberation of Bangladesh. India is celebrating its own Swarnim Vijay Varsh to recall the 1971 war, one that led to the creation of the modern state of Bangladesh. Prime Minister Modi will visit the Jashorshwari temple in Isharipur, a temple dedicated to the goddess Kali and one of the Shakti Peeths of Hindu religion. He will then visit Tungipara to pay homage at the Bangabandhu Mausoleum, and finally to a Thakur Bari in Orakandi. Orakandi is the birthplace of Harichand Thakur, who formed the Matua sect. Matuas migrated from Bangladesh to West Bengal and can influence polling in the 70 assembly constituencies in the Indian state that goes to polls at the end of this month.
India-Bangladesh relationship have stood out in a fast-changing world, from COVID vaccines to connectivity. Bangladesh in the region has got the maximum number of India-made vaccines. The visit of the Indian Prime Minister will reaffirm the strong partnership between the two countries at a time when both countries are celebrating the 50th year of diplomatic relationship. The video journalist Ajit Siddhant Sibal for WION in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Brazil is gasping for breath. Hospital beds and oxygen cylinders are running low. The Wuhan virus is claiming thousands of victims every day. A contagious mutation is crossing regional borders. It is now or never for this country. But its president is busy swapping ministers and celebrating his birthday. Wednesday was especially grim. More than 3,000 deaths in 24 hours. The Wuhan virus has claimed 300,000 lives in Brazil. 3 lakh. Only the United States has a higher death toll. The reports we are getting from hospitals do not look good. There is a critical lack of oxygen cylinders. Patients are being shuttled between hospitals. ICU beds could run out in days. Out of the 26 regions, 18 are reporting 90% occupancy in ICUs. The Pan American Health Organization says the situation is dire. Brazil's virus surge could hurt the entire region. Experts say the country needs another lockdown, at least a partial one. But Bolsonaro remains defiant. He says lockdowns are job killers. We agree they are, but so is the virus. It is a killer. And to make matters worse, there is a new mutation on the prowl. It is called the P1 variant. It emerged in northern Brazil, out in the Amazon region. Most of the new cases are of this new variant. Since the president is not helping, state governors have taken matters into their own hands and they have imposed restrictions on their own. But it may already be too late. The dangerous P1 variant has jumped borders. Latin American leaders are furious at Bolsonaro.
It is alarming, I would say even distressing, to see the reports from Brazil and the irresponsible attitude of the Brazilian Trumpist right, the irresponsible attitude of Jair Bolsonaro with the Brazilian people. Brazil, with the biggest collapse, has become the world's worst threat in terms of the coronavirus pandemic.
En cuanto a la pandemia del coronavirus.
You know you're in trouble when Nicolas Maduro is taking a swipe at you. This month is being called Red March in Brazil. 40,000 deaths so far, and we've still got 6 days before the month ends. The only thing that can help Brazil is vaccines. Regulators have approved AstraZeneca jabs and Sinovac. At least 6% of the population has got the first dose. The rollout has been extremely slow. It also did not help that Bolsonaro refused to get the jab himself. Vaccine hesitancy is on the rise and it is dangerous. We've all heard about the captain who refuses to abandon the ship. In this case, the captain is punching holes up and down the ship's bow. We've also in fact been tracking the outbreak in India. The last couple of days have been worrying. In 24 hours, more than 47,000 cases were reported. It was the biggest daily caseload this year. It's a new wave of infections, compounded by a double mutant. This is a new development. So we'll answer the big questions one by one. Firstly, What does a double mutation mean? Simply put, it's when two virus variants combine together to create a third variant. That is a double mutation. Now, India's double mutant contains two distinct strains. One is a mutation from California and the other is a homegrown variant. What does double mutation do to a virus? It changes the spike protein. In some cases, the virus becomes more resistant to antibodies and even vaccines. So does this mean it is more dangerous? Well, there aren't any indications of this just yet. The vaccines approved in India should continue to work against the double mutant. 18 states have reported this new double mutation. The bulk of the cases are from the state of Maharashtra. Meanwhile, India's vaccine drive is gathering steam. More than 50 million doses have been administered so far. From April, every Indian aged 45 and above can line up to get their shot. But remember, vaccines are a shield. They're not an invisibility cloak. Masks and social distancing must continue. Herd immunity is the ultimate goal. One of the world's most important shipping routes is jammed. The Suez Canal is a vital artery of international trade, but one of the largest container ships in the world is now blocking it. Let's first give you some numbers to help understand the extent of this crisis. The blockage has halted the trade of at least 6.3 million barrels of crude oil. This is worth $400 million. Indians are on board that stranded ship. It has a 25-member crew. All of them are Indians. The owner and the insurers of the ship are set to face millions in claims. Reports say container ships like this one are insured for damage of $100 to $140 million. The losses for those involved are heavy. According to a report, they're losing $400 million per hour. Every hour, $400 million. And if we have to go by the words of one of the experts, this situation could lead to a heart attack for global trade. But the race to clear the waterway is also inspiring a range of memes. Here's a report.
12% of global trade passes through this route. Now it is jammed. A massive ship about the size of 4 soccer fields is blocking the Suez Canal. Dozens of vessels are stuck. Rescue boats are trying to free this giant container ship called the Ever Given. This vessel is operated by a Taiwanese company called Evergreen. While traveling north towards the Mediterranean, it lost all power and ran sideways. What followed was a nightmare for global trade.
The Suez Canal is one of those absolutely strategic waterways of the world, like the Panama Canal is. It carries about 12% of world trade each year. That's roughly, in monetary terms, about $1.1 trillion worth of cargo passed through the Suez Canal, about 3 billion every day. About 18,000 ships use it a year. It's about 50 ships a day, so it's absolutely key. So you get something like this, a ship effectively blocking it, you actually really are blocking that trade flow.
The Suez is one of the world's most important trading routes. It links the Mediterranean with the Red Sea, connecting Asia, West Asia, and Europe. Egypt, that has full control over the Suez, has now reopened an old channel to divert some traffic. But the blockage made some traders nervous. Oil prices climbed in the international markets initially. That's because the Suez is used to transport key supplies of oil and liquefied natural gas. Reports say more than 10 million barrels of oil are stuck on the Evergreen alone. The immediate challenge is to free up the Suez. But experts anticipate more trouble ahead.
With a cork being put in the Suez Canal, that now means a week from now, the northern European ports will not be receiving these port calls because the vessels are stuck down there. And then the cork comes out. It's almost like a ketchup bottle. Then you get both all the vessels in the queue and the additional normal vessels coming into the northern European ports at the same time. So the longer this lasts, the higher the risk that we're going to see massive congestion problems.
While the crisis is grave, some people on the internet saw the lighter side when an excavator was brought in to free up the ship. One netizen compared the situation to her battles with anxiety. Another found a rather creative way to visualize the problem at hand. And this one saw his own life problems in the giant ship. By Wednesday, the ship had partly refloated, but it could take a while to move it. This is a traffic jam of epic proportions. Don't expect the ships to move in a hurry, and don't expect the memes to stop flowing. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
People travel across the world for some fine aged wine. You get the best ones in places like France and Australia, among others. But a dozen lucky tasters were treated to wine from a place where few humans have been. We are talking about space. After 1 year at the International Space Station, a batch of grape wines have returned to Earth. But the question is, does fine wine still taste fine after a voyage in space?
Dutch courage with some galactic flair. That is what 12 lucky wine tasters were treated to in Bordeaux. An experiment like never before. What does wine taste like after a year in space?
Station Houston on 2.
The groundwork began in 2020. Space Cargo Unlimited sent a batch of grape wines to the International Space Station. It remained there for a full year until January 2021, when the cargo returned. 12 bottles of Bordeaux, 320 snippets of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. The vintage sample is worth $6,000. But that was before it voyaged into space. Putting a price on it now is impossible.
The main reason going to space was, in fact, to see how the aging process is working and how we can influence the aging process. For that, we need to know how the aging process is working. And the only way to find out the role of certain substances is to go under conditions where you can exclude these working of this substance, for example, oxygen.
So how did the tasting go? 12 connoisseurs sampled 2 vintages, one that arrived from space and another aged on Earth. Needless to say, it was a blind tasting. Usually, wine tasters are a sharp lot. They can pick up the most subtle of differences. Would they be able to identify the sample from space?
So both were absolutely gorgeous, but again, following the colour, the one that had remained on Earth for me was still a little bit more closed, a bit more tannic, a bit younger, and the one that had been up into space, the tannins had softened, the more floral aromatics came out.
For me, the difference between the space and Earth wine, it wasn't easy to define. I'm not sure I got it right. I'm being honest, it was very difficult.
The verdict? There were changes in the color, taste and aroma. The lack of gravity and oxygen clearly made an impact. The grape wines from space appeared to grow faster. They flowered just 3 to 4 weeks after returning to Earth. This experiment wasn't just about tasting space-traveled booze. It was about understanding how plants develop outside the Earth's atmosphere. The conditions in space are harsh. Survival tactics there can help farming on Earth.
What are we hoping for is that the plants that come back from ISS might have acquired trademarks, different characteristics from Earth wines. That is the objective of our research. We will now challenge these plants with, for example, diseases as wine mildew that poses a lot of problems.
Space brewed wine could help tackle the challenges of climate change, prepare cultivators for more stressful growing conditions. The cost of this venture has not been revealed, but the results could well be worth the out-of-this-world hangover. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
Yep.
トーチに聖火が点火され、会場の皆さんの拍手に送られて送り出すことができました。